Have you ever heard this wild idea that your zip code might actually matter more for your health than your genetic code? It's a pretty surprising thought, right? But it's at the very heart of a huge shift happening in public health. Today, we're going to dive into how scientists are using maps to uncover these profound and often totally invisible links between where we live and how well we live. I know, it sounds a little bit like science fiction, but this idea is a major driving force in public health today. For so long, the focus has been on genetics and our individual lifestyle choices. But what if some of the biggest health factors are literally right outside our front door? This shift in thinking is changing just about everything, from how we plan our cities to how we deliver healthcare. So, how in the world do we start to see these hidden connections? Well, the key is a technology called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. The easiest way to think about it is like being able to stack invisible layers of information, things like pollution sources, income levels, where hospitals are, all on top of one single map. And bam, all of a sudden you can see these incredible patterns that were completely hidden before.
Okay, but before we can go finding all those fascinating patterns, we need the right tools. And it all starts with the question that sounds simple, but is actually surprisingly tricky. What does it really mean for something to be near? Yeah, the answer is a little more complicated than you might think.
Just think about getting to a hospital. You might only be a mile away as the crow flies, right? A straight line. But what if that straight line goes directly over a river with no bridge or a highway with no exit? The real-world distance, the actual roads you have to drive on, that's what really matters. And this difference between a straight line and the actual travel network, that's the first crucial tool in our analyst's toolkit. And this leads us right to our next tool, proximity analysis. It's all about understanding what nearness means in the real world. You know, a clinic might be just across that river, but if the closest bridge is 5 miles down the road, that clinic isn't really near you at all, is it? Proximity analysis is how we start to account for all those real-world barriers. So how do we actually visualize this idea of nearness on a map? Well, that's where something called buffer analysis comes in. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. You just draw a circle or a zone around a location to create what's called a buffer zone. This can instantly show you who lives within, say, a 5-minute drive of a fire station, or who might be living within a half mile of a polluting factory. And the cool part is, you can create these buffer zones around almost anything. It can be a single point, like a school, it can be a line, like a busy highway, or it could be an entire area, like an industrial park. It's this simple technique that is just so powerful for seeing who might be affected by something, whether that's for better or for worse. Okay, so let's recap. We've got our toolkit: network distance, proximity analysis, and these buffer zones. Now let's see how these tools are actually being used to save lives. We're going to take a trip to Ghana, where researchers are using this stuff on the front lines of a public health revolution.
So in many parts of Ghana, the health challenges are really stark. On one hand, you've got entire communities that are miles and miles away from the nearest doctor. And then on the other hand, you might have families living right next door to unregulated mining operations. GIS mapping is what's allowing health officials to tackle both of these problems with a kind of precision that was just impossible a few years ago.
All right, so here's the first step. The analysis starts by just calculating the simple straight line distance from every single settlement to the nearest health clinic. See those red lines? Those are the ones we're really worried about. They're connecting communities that are over 3 kilometers away. This gives us a rough idea of who's at risk, but, it's really just the beginning. Now watch what happens when we apply that buffer analysis we were talking about. These circles you see are the 3 and 5 kilometer service zones around each clinic. And wow, suddenly the picture becomes crystal clear. We can see exactly which communities are falling through the cracks, living outside those zones. This isn't just a map anymore. It's a roadmap for action. It shows officials exactly where a new clinic could have the biggest impact. But wait a minute, what if being near something is actually a bad thing? These exact same tools can be used to map not just access to good things like healthcare, but also exposure to risk. So let's flip the script and look at the other side of the coin. What you're looking at here is a map that pinpoints the locations of mineral mining sites in southwestern Ghana. Now, these mines can release heavy metals and other nasty toxins into the air and the water, and that poses a really serious health risk to any community nearby. So the urgent question becomes, who is living in the shadow of these mines? And the process they use to figure that out is so simple but so powerful. Step 1, you map the hazard. Step 2, you draw one of those risk buffers around each source. And then, step 3, you overlay population data. And just like that, in an instant, you can see not just where the risks are, but exactly how many people are living right in harm's way. This is how a map becomes a life-saving tool. But here's the thing. These maps, as powerful as they aren't magic. They're built on a foundation of data and a whole lot of assumptions. And to use them responsibly, you really have to understand their limits. It's time for us to look between the lines of the map. For example, a simple model might assume that pollution spreads out from a factory in a perfect circle, but what about the wind or river currents? It might assume that traveling uphill is just as easy as traveling downhill. And maybe most important of all, the entire analysis is only as good as the data you put into it. These are the kinds of critical questions that good analysts are always asking. This brings us to a really key scientific idea called geophysical plausibility. Now, it's a fancy term, but it's actually a pretty simple concept. It just means that, look, just because you live near a factory doesn't automatically mean you're being harmed by it. There has to be a real physical pathway. The wind has to blow it your way, or the chemicals have to seep into your groundwater. Proximity isn't enough. You need a pathway. And this is why getting the science right is so incredibly important. As one study warns, if you only look at simple proximity, just how close things are, you're likely to overestimate the population truly exposed. And what does that mean? It means you waste resources and you fail to protect the people who are actually at risk. It's a stark reminder that in public health, the details can literally be a matter of life and death. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? At the end of the day, it's that one simple question, where, can completely revolutionize public health. As soon as we start thinking spatially, we unlock a whole new way of understanding and solving some of the world's biggest health challenges. You can really think of this as a before and after for public health. Before, we often had these one-size-fits-all policies that weren't very efficient. But now, with the power of spatial analysis, we can move to a smart model with targeted, data-driven actions that get the right resources to the right people at the right time. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. These tools let us connect the dots between our environment and our health in a way that was never, ever possible before. Like one research paper puts it, using GIS can truly enhance the understanding of the association between contaminants and disease. It makes the invisible connections that shape our health visible. And that brings us right back to where we started. We began with that big question. Does your zip code matter more than your genetic code? And after everything we've seen, I think the answer is a resounding yes. The maps from Ghana tell an incredible story about the hidden links between our location and our health. And it leaves us with one final thought. What's the health story that your own neighborhood is just waiting to tell?